Since his release all the way back in 2011, Viktor has never been a particularly popular character in League's mythos, at least not to the broader community. He has had something of a niche following in certain segments of the fandom, but generally tends to fall by the wayside compared to more iconic Zonite champions like Jinx or Echo. Of course, with the success of Arcane and Viktor's prominent role within it, the character's popularity has skyrocketed a bit. However, due to the show's massive divergence from the established League canon, many champions in the show have been put in somewhat awkward situations regarding their current lore states, and Viktor is perhaps one of the biggest examples. We've already touched on this in a previous video, but the character of Viktor literally does not exist in the lore anymore. As his story now attempts to follow that of Arcane, the champion is completely gone from Runeterra following the events of Season 2. We'll talk more about that later, but let's rewind a bit and start at the beginning. In Viktor's original bio, he was a student of Piltover's University of Techmaturgy, back when that was still a term, and used his brilliance to create the world's first truly sentient machine in the form of Blitzcrank. However, credit for his research was stolen by one Professor Stanwyck, who then went on to use Viktor's notes in the resurrection of Urgot before his VGU. Unable to expose the professor's lies, Viktor retreated from the college and isolated himself from the world. In his solitude, Viktor decided to begin work on a project that no one else could possibly take credit for: himself. Viktor sought to overcome both the physical and emotional limitations of humanity by transforming himself into a machine. And when he next re-emerged, Viktor had succeeded. Viktor had not only replaced most of his body with mechanical components, but he'd even managed to nearly completely suppress all of his emotions. Or so the story claimed. How he achieved all this by himself, however, is anyone's guess.
Whoa, slow down. Are you an android? Holy shit, you're an android. How did you even do that?
I took my brain out and put it into this body.
How?
How did I do that?
Viktor then joined the League of Legends to test the limits of his new augments, putting himself in high-stress battles against the most dangerous opponents Runeterra had to offer, but with the safety net of summoners being able to revive him should he fall. This was to be the start of the glorious evolution, a movement to help humanity artificially reach its next stage. That became the crux of Viktor's character, Runeterra's resident transhumanist. Viktor's post-retcon bio was a lot lengthier, to be frank. We honestly don't have time to go over the whole thing in this video, so I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version. Viktor was born in the slumps of Zon, but managed to work his way into the College of Piltover through a series of happenstances. There, he met Jace, a brilliant but egotistical colleague whose approach to science was Viktor's total opposite, preferring to rely on intuition over sheer logic. The two formed a begrudging respect for one another, but never saw eye to eye enough to become friends. They've often been compared to Reed Richards and Victor Von Doom from Marvel, and it's not an inaccurate comparison. Anyway, Viktor created Blitzcrank, and as before, the credit for the golem's creation was stolen from him by one of his professors. He also witnesses a tragedy down in the sumps that he believes was caused by human error, where everyone else blamed an equipment malfunction. These incidents, along with a few other factors, convince Viktor that emotions are detrimental and a hindrance to progress, and that the human form is inefficient and fragile. People commit evil acts out of arrogance and greed and are too prideful to acknowledge their own shortcomings, instead searching for excuses rather than addressing the root cause of the problem. So, as before, Viktor runs off and somehow operates on himself to become a cyborg. Shortly afterward, Jace starts experimenting with a hex crystal in his lab. Viktor learns about this and believes that the crystal could be the key to furthering his research. But Jace isn't into that transhumanist philosophy, so he turns Viktor down. The two fight, Viktor loses, and Jace goes on to create hex tech while Viktor somewhat accidentally creates a cult by giving people in Zon's cyborg enhancement to replace their bodily injuries. Viktor eventually embraces his role as a pseudo-cult leader, preaching the ideals of the glorious evolution that will one day see all of humanity shed the frailties of flesh and the hindrances of emotion in favor of steel and cold hard logic. He basically does become something of a supervillain, using whatever means he sees fit to further his goals without pesky concepts like morality to limit him. However, Viktor does do some genuine good for the people of Zaun, and it should be noted that he's never actually forced anyone to augment themselves, at least that we know of. In truth, Viktor may still harbor more emotion than he cares to admit, adding a bit of nuance to his character. In truth, I've always felt like Viktor's lore was pretty solidly written, whatever iteration you want to accept as canon. The issue has never been with the character's backstory, but more so his design. Viktor is supposed to be the progenitor of Hextech augmentation in Zaun, the leader of a cyborg revolution whose body, as multiple bios tells us, has been utterly transformed into steel. And yet, he never really looked the part, did he? I mean, most of the metal on his body looks like it could be augmentation, but it could just as easily be read as armor, especially with the fact that he feels the need to decorate himself with a cape. For a man who's supposed to be about function over form, I'm not sure why Viktor feels the need to wear an accessory of any kind. Like, even his faceplate is apparently just a mask for some reason. So much for completely transforming himself into a machine, huh? Moreover, most of Viktor's abilities have always seemed to rely around various gadgets that he had on his person. The crux of his power is the hex core he carries around in his staff, and his gravity field, force field, and storm generators all appeared to be devices he would toss out onto the field. The only actual augment Viktor clearly explicitly had is the third hand on his shoulder, which can fire death rays. I mean, compare Viktor to other cyborg characters in Runeterra. Camille's got deadly blades for legs, grappling hooks in her hips, and a built-in force field generator. Oriana is a walking ship of Theseus paradox, whose only remaining organic component is her heart. This makes her pretty much immune to the terminal illness that once threatened to take her life, and her torso even hovers freely unattached from her legs, for some reason. I never really understood the point of this, but it's neat, and it's something that only the cyborg could do, so why not? Oriana is also way more detached from her emotions, which is another thing that even Viktor himself doesn't seem to have fully suppressed, despite claiming that to be one of his main goals. Hell, even the new Urgot gets pretty wild with his augments, giving himself multiple legs with built-in shotguns, a turret on his arm, the ability to freely rotate his torso a full 360 degrees, and a meat grinder in his stomach. Put all of that next to Viktor, and the Machine Herald starts to look a little mundane. Like, you could maybe excuse that his augments are pretty basic at first since he was still kind of figuring out the whole cyborg thing when he started, but LOR established that Viktor is able to upgrade other people with cannon arms, cloaking devices, and even the ability to freely customize their own appearance. Why, then, would Viktor not see fit to give himself any of these enhancements? I mean, why stop at just giving yourself one extra limb? Why not give yourself the ability to freely rotate your torso like Urgot or Oriana can? Why not incorporate abilities like the force field or storm generators into your body? You could give yourself rockets in your back or feet to enable flight, thermal or X-ray vision, the ability to freely deploy weapons or tools from your arms. For a guy with such a grandiose vision of the future, Viktor sure seems to lack imagination. But, of course, that brings us to Arcane, which tries to give Viktor a more techno-organic vibe and portrays a lot more of his abilities as magic-based, including the ability to just upgrade people by touching them rather than surgically replacing organs and limbs. I do not care for this, and from what I've seen and heard around the fandom, I'm not the only one. While Arcane's version of Viktor is certainly a lot less mundane than his canon portrayal, it also feels like it completely misses the point. I know this is not by any means a new sentiment, but it still warrants being said. Regardless of how you feel about the show and Viktor's portrayal within it, this iteration of the character removed everything that made Viktor unique among League's roster, turning him into another generic spellcaster instead of a man using the strengths of technology in a world so heavily reliant on magic. In fact, a lot of people call Arcane Viktor Malzahar 2.0, being that he's now this evil cult leader, but I have an even better comparison for you. So Viktor now wants to achieve world peace by forcing everyone into a hive mind that he controls, distorting their bodies into motionless mannequins for all time, right? Is that not literally just Zalani? Is that not what her entire deal was in the Darken Saga? She wants to end all death and conflict by putting everyone under her control via blood magic. She warps people's bodies with said blood magic, even having a similar sort of metal mesh thing going on. And, oh yeah, she even leads a cult. Like, I may have my gripes with Zalani as a character, but come on, guys. They literally just copy and pasted her onto Viktor. Now, VGUs are and always have been kind of a double-edged sword. Their goal is to update a character to better realize their potential as a character, and usually for the better. But it always comes with a trade-off, sacrificing one element of their identity to focus on another. Fiddlesticks lost some of his initial goofiness to crank up the creep factor to 11. Karma gave up her fan-based fighting style to achieve greater spiritual power. In Viktor's case, they removed his reliance on actual technology to lean further into his belief that humanity and free will must be sacrificed if true peace is to ever be achieved. The issue is that there are already a number of other characters in Runeterra's mythos who have a similar or identical deal going on. We already talked about Zalani, but there's also champions like Xerath and Mordekaiser, who turn people into energy thralls and soul slaves, respectively. Put more simply, not only does Viktor no longer even exist as far as Riot is concerned, but they removed the one thing that honestly made him kind of unique in a lineup of over 150 characters. It's not hard to see why so many fans of the character are so upset, regardless of how you feel about Arcane. But what do you all think? How do you believe Viktor should have been handled? Was he fine as is, or would you have preferred Riot to just get more inventive with his augments? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and until next time, stay bright.